Today I'll be talking about 3 different types of fermented dishes that can be found in the Asian culture. Can you imagine just having a huge bowl of fermented soybeans that are wrapped up in this stringy, slimy substance that was made by bacteria and then eating it? Well, those are the type of dishes that are found in the Asian culture. I lived in Japan and South Korea for a total of 3 years and came across many dishes like that. Out of the 3 dishes that I'll be talking about today, I've only ever tried one, but the other 2 I've seen and they have been very interesting looking and interesting smelling. The 3 dishes I'll be discussing will be natto, kasuya, and kimchi. I'll also be discussing where they originate from, what they're made of, and how they're made. So let's just start with natto. I'm sure this is something you you're not familiar with because it's not a common household dish or something you go to a restaurant up here and go eat or order. And according to the article History of Natto and Its Relatives, there are many theories on where it originated from. One is a legend that took place in the 1700s where the Prince of Japan at the time, Shutoku, put his leftover soybeans in this rice wrap overnight, and in the morning, poof, there was natto, and he ate it for breakfast. Even though the origins cannot be pinpointed, there are, however, writings from the mid to late 1900s of the Japanese people making and eating natto. Now, natto consists of just soybeans and this bacteria called Bacillus natto. It's easily made at home. So if you're wondering how to make it, all you have to do is soak soybeans for 9 to 12 hours, give it ample amount of time to soak, then you drain the beans and then put them in water again in a pot and boil them for another 9 hours. After that, you drain it again and you put it in a pot that has been sterilized because you don't want any other type of bacteria in that pot, otherwise it just ruins everything. So once the soybeans are in that sterilized pot, you sprinkle bacteria over it, that Bacillus natto, put cheesecloth over the top of the container, and put a lid on very tightly so air cannot get into it. Next, you'll place it in the oven or somewhere where you can keep the temperature up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit and cook it for 22 to 24 hours. Once it's done cooking, all you have to do is let it cool for a couple hours and enjoy the dish. The next dish I'd like to talk to you about is called kasuya. Now, kasuya can be related to buying a smoked fish at the grocery store and getting it home, and it has like a foul smell, and it's super salty and really dry. Well, that's a type of dish that is still being eaten in Japan. According to the article Kasuya, the Japanese stinky fish, it originated on the Izu Islands of Japan during the Edo period from 1603 to 1868. Now, during this time, salt was a very expensive commodity, so the people had to use it frugally. And since salt is a main ingredient in the brine that is used for the fermentation process of kasuya, they had to find a very efficient way to save it. So some of that brine that they would use would be over 100 years old. And not just to conserve the salt, but it would also be for the unique flavor that the fish that dish had. The type of fish that are used for kasuya is kasuya maro, or you could also use flying fish or mackerel. Now, the process of making this can be done traditionally or in a more modern way. Traditionally, what you would do is you would open up the fish and take the internal organs out by hand, and you just discard them because there was no need for them. Then you would butterfly the fish open, rinse it with cold water to rid it of any dirt so there was no room for bacterial growth. Once the dirt was removed, you would put it in the brine or the kasuya juice and let it soak there for 9 to 20 hours. You just want enough time for that meat to soak up all the juices. Once that's done, you let the fish sit out in the sun until it's completely dry. The next dish I'd like to talk to you about is kimchi. Now, I'm sure this is a more familiar term because this can be found in grocery stores now up here. There are many different types of vegetables that you can use to make kimchi, but I'm going to focus on cabbage kimchi. According to an article of History of Kimchi, kimchi originated around the time of 2030 BC. This is where inhabitants of northern India came over to the valley region in southern China and brought cabbage seeds. And then they began to grow the cabbage and then preserve it in this brine, which was very popular in China, Mongolia, and the peninsula of Korea. The kimchi that we know of today was produced in the Korean peninsula. In order to make kimchi, you need to have Napa cabbage, salt, cold water, scallions, red pepper powder, fish sauce, ginger, garlic, Korean salted shrimp, and granulated sugar. Now, in order to make this, what you would do is you would combine all the seasonings and spices and the water and let the cabbage soak in it for a time being. Once that's done being soaked, you would place it into this earth-worn pot, and you would place it into the ground. And this is where the fermentation process would start and begin, and it would also help keep the kimchi cool so that you wouldn't have to worry about keeping it cool in another way. Nowadays, it's just for mass production. You just use nothing but machines for the fermentation process and keeping it cool. So in brief, there are many more fermented dishes in Asia, but now you at least know of 3 of them: natto, kusaya, and kimchi. They are all very common in Eastern Asia especially. So the next time you're out eating and you have the opportunity to eat some other type of Asian dish, don't be afraid to try something a little different.